Pamela Sturch ran tour buses up my private hill road for 3 summers straight. She told the HOA it was a community scenic route. She told the tour company it was a public access road. She told everyone except me. When I finally closed the gate, she filed a complaint with the county and called me a public nuisance. So I pulled out a 70-year-old commercial transport license, dusted it off, and reopened that road as a licensed rock and aggregate hauling route. 40-ton trucks, 6 days a week, right past her window. My name is Colt Reeves. I own 43 acres on the eastern slope of Hardin Hill. My family has held that land since my grandfather purchased it in 1951. The deed is clean. The boundaries are surveyed. The road that runs from the county blacktop up to my property, a graded gravel road roughly 1.5 miles long, was built by my grandfather using his own equipment and his own money. That road has never been public. It has never been deeded to the county. It has never been part of any HOA common area agreement. I have documentation going back decades confirming all of that. I am not a confrontational person. I run a small aggregate and landscaping supply operation on the lower portion of my acreage. I keep to myself. I pay my taxes on time. I maintain my fences. But when someone spends 3 years using your private property as a commercial thoroughfare, without permission, without compensation, and without so much as a phone call, and then has the nerve to file a legal complaint against you when you close your own gate, you stop being quiet. This is the story of what happened when I stopped being quiet. Hardin Hill is not a glamorous place. There are no manicured lawns up here, no streetlights, no sidewalks. The road to my property cuts through scrub oak and limestone outcroppings. In spring, it smells like cedar and wet clay. In summer, the grass goes gold and dry. It is quiet most of the year. That is exactly why my grandfather chose it. I inherited the property from my father 12 years ago. At that point, the aggregate business was already established, small but stable. We supplied crushed limestone and gravel to local contractors, landscapers, and the occasional county road crew. Nothing large scale. 2 employees, 1 loader, a handful of regular accounts. My house sits about halfway up the hill. It is a single-story ranch-style home, nothing fancy. I built the back porch myself. I have a dog named Heck. I grow tomatoes in the summer and fail at it every year. The lower section of my acreage borders the Hardin Hill Estates HOA development. That subdivision went in about 14 years ago. 41 homes, mostly retirees and remote workers who wanted hill country views without the full rural commitment. When they first moved in, relations were fine, neighborly even. I had no issues with most of them. Pamela Sturch and her husband Greg moved into Hardin Hill Estates 7 years ago. Pamela became HOA board president within 18 months. I remember the exact moment my peaceful life started changing. It was a Tuesday morning in early April. I was loading a customer order near the lower gate. I looked up and saw a white charter bus idling on my gravel road. I did not recognize it. I had not authorized it, and it was pointed uphill. I set down my clipboard and walked toward the bus. It was a full-size charter, white with blue lettering on the side. The name on the door said, Hill Country Scenic Tours. There were passengers visible through the tinted windows. I counted at least 20 heads. The driver was a heavy-set man in a polo shirt. He had a laminated route sheet clipped to his visor. When I knocked on the door, he opened it without hesitation, like he had done this 100 times before. I asked him where he was going. He said he was running the Hardin Hill Scenic Loop, said it was on his approved route sheet. He showed me the paper. It listed my gravel road by name, Old Reeves Track, as a designated scenic corridor. I asked him who approved that route. He said the HOA coordinated it, said a woman named Pamela had handled all the paperwork. I told him calmly that this road was private property. I told him it was not a scenic corridor. I told him it was not approved for charter bus traffic. I told him he needed to turn around. He looked confused, not defensive, genuinely confused. He said he had been running this route every Saturday for the past 4 months. He said nobody had ever stopped him before. That landed hard. 4 months, every Saturday, on my road, without a single word to me. I kept my voice level. I told him I was not angry at him personally. I told him the route authorization was invalid and that he should contact whoever sold him that route for a refund. I stepped back. He closed the door. He did a slow 3-point turn on my gravel and headed back down toward the blacktop. I stood there for a moment after the bus left. Then I pulled out my phone and called Pamela Sturch. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was bright and pleasant, the kind of pleasant that feels practiced. I introduced myself. I told her what had just happened. I told her a charter bus had been using my private road for 4 months without my knowledge or consent. I asked her to explain how that had happened. There was a brief pause. Then she told me the road had always been part of the community's scenic access network. She said it was understood by everyone in the area. She used the phrase community asset twice in the same sentence. I asked her to show me the documentation that designated my private road as a community asset. She said it was a long-standing informal arrangement. I told her informal arrangements do not apply to private property. Her tone shifted slightly. Still pleasant, but with an edge underneath it now. She said she was sure we could work something out. She said the tours brought positive attention to the whole hill area. She said property values benefited. I told her I would need everything in writing before any bus set wheel on my road again. She said she would be in touch. She was not in touch. Not that week. Not the week after. The following Saturday, another bus came up my road. I did not wave it down this time. I let it pass. I watched it go up the hill. I watched it come back down 40 minutes later. And while it was up there, I did 3 things. First, I got my camera. I photographed the bus, the plate number, the company name on the side, the timestamp on my phone. I photographed the tire tracks pressing into my gravel. I photographed the gate I had left open that morning for a delivery truck, the same gate Pamela's tour buses had apparently been using as a welcome mat for 4 months. Second, I called Bud Wexler. Bud owns the 30-acre parcel directly north of mine. He has lived on Hardin Hill for over 40 years. He knows every road, every fence line, every property boundary on this hill better than most surveyors do. I asked him if he knew about the tour buses using my road. He was quiet for a second. Then he said he had seen them going up and down for a while now. He thought I had some kind of deal worked out with the HOA. He said Pamela had mentioned at a community meeting that the scenic route had landowner cooperation. Landowner cooperation. I had never spoken to Pamela Sturch about any scenic route. I had never signed anything. I had never given verbal permission. I had never been asked. Bud said he was sorry he had not mentioned it sooner. He said he would back me up on whatever I needed. Third, I drove down to the county clerk's office. I pulled the deed records on my road. I pulled the original property survey from 1951. I pulled every recorded easement document associated with my parcel going back 70 years. I spent 2 hours at that counter going through paper. What I found was exactly what I already knew. There was no easement on my road. No public access designation, no recorded right-of-way in favor of any HOA, any tour company, or any third party. The road was mine, fully and without condition. I made copies of everything. I had them certified. When I got home that evening, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote Pamela Sturch a formal letter. I kept it short. I stated that the road known as Old Reeves Track was private property under my sole ownership. I stated that no easement or access agreement existed. I stated that all unauthorized vehicle access must cease immediately. I gave her 7 days to respond in writing. I sent it certified mail with return receipt requested. The return receipt came back 4 days later, signed by Greg Sturch. Pamela never responded. The Saturday after my 7-day deadline passed, I counted 3 buses in a single morning. That was the moment I understood what I was dealing with. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not an oversight. Pamela Sturch knew exactly what she was doing. She had decided my letter did not matter. She had decided I did not matter. That was her first serious mistake. I closed the gate the following Monday, not aggressively, not dramatically. I simply drove down to the lower entrance, swung the heavy steel gate shut, and ran a chain through the latch. I padlocked it with a commercial-grade lock. I posted 2 signs on the gate. One said private property, the other said no trespassing, unauthorized vehicle access prohibited. I had both signs laminated. I dated and photographed them in place. Then I went back up the hill and resumed my day. The following Saturday, I watched from my porch with a cup of coffee. The bus came down the county blacktop right on schedule. It slowed at my gate. It idled there for a few minutes. Then it turned around and left. I felt no satisfaction, just confirmation. The road was usable only because I had left it open. The moment I closed it, the entire operation fell apart. That told me everything about the legal foundation Pamela had built this on. There was none. 2 days later, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. It was a man named Derek from Hill Country Scenic Tours. He was polite but frustrated. He said his Saturday route had been blocked. He said the HOA had sold him a seasonal route package, and he had paying customers who expected that scenic loop. He asked if there was any way to work something out. I told him I was sorry for his situation. I told him the road was private, and the HOA had no authority to sell access to it. I suggested he contact Pamela Sturch and request a refund for the misrepresented route. I gave him my mailing address and told him if he ever received any written documentation claiming a legal easement on my road, to please send me a copy. He thanked me and hung up. I never heard from Derek again. But I kept notes on that call: date, time, his name, the substance of the conversation. I added it to the folder I had started building after the first bus showed up. 3 days after that call, a letter arrived from the HOA. It was printed on official HOA letterhead. It was signed by Pamela Sturch, board president. It informed me that my gate closure was creating an unreasonable obstruction to community access. It cited a section of the HOA's own community guidelines. It said I was in violation of a cooperative access understanding that had been in place for multiple seasons. It requested that I remove the obstruction within 72 hours or face a formal complaint to the county. I read it twice. Then I noticed something. The letter cited the HOA's internal community guidelines, not county code, not state law, not any recorded legal instrument, their own internal rulebook, applied to my private property that was not part of their HOA, property I had never enrolled in any HOA agreement. I was not a member of Hardin Hill Estates HOA. I had never been a member. My land predated their entire subdivision by over 40 years. Pamela had just made her second serious mistake. I did not respond to the HOA letter immediately. I sat on it for 2 days. Not because I was unsure, because I wanted my response to be precise. Every word measured, every claim documented. I did not want to write something in frustration that I would have to walk back later. On the 3rd day, I wrote my reply. I stated clearly that my property was not subject to HOA jurisdiction. I attached a copy of my deed. I attached the original 1951 survey. I attached the certified easement search showing 0 recorded access rights on Old Reeves Track. I stated that their internal community guidelines had no legal authority over private land outside their subdivision boundary. I requested that all further communication regarding road access be directed to a legal representative. I signed it, made 3 copies, and sent the original certified mail. Then I called Nora Finch. Nora is a property rights attorney based about 30 miles south of Hardin Hill. She came recommended by Bud Wexler, who had used her years back for a boundary dispute with a pipeline company. Bud said she was thorough, patient, and not easily rattled. I drove to her office that Thursday afternoon. I brought the full folder: deed records, survey documents, certified easement search, the HOA letter, my written response, photographs of the buses, notes from the phone call with Derek, the certified mail receipt signed by Greg Sturch. Nora went through everything slowly. She asked a few clarifying questions. She did not seem surprised by any of it. When she finished, she leaned back and told me the HOA had no legal standing whatsoever. She said their attempt to apply internal HOA guidelines to non-member property was not just overreach, it was legally frivolous. She said the bigger issue was the 3 seasons of unauthorized commercial access. She said that if Pamela had been charging the tour company for route access, that created potential liability exposure for the HOA that went well beyond a neighborhood dispute. That last part caught my attention. I asked Nora if she thought Pamela had been collecting money from the tour company. Nora said she did not know, but she said the question was worth asking. A tour company does not simply add a private road to a paid route package without some kind of authorization document. Someone had to provide that document. And if that document misrepresented the ownership or access status of my road, that was a serious problem for whoever signed it. I asked Nora what our next step was. She said 2 things. First, keep the gate locked. Do not open it for any reason related to the tours. Second, file a formal trespass notice with the county sheriff's office, documenting the unauthorized commercial use. Not a complaint yet, just a notice. A legal timestamp establishing that I had formally objected. I did both before the end of that week. The trespass notice was filed on a Friday afternoon. By Monday morning, Pamela had filed her complaint with the county, claiming I was obstructing a historic community access corridor. She had escalated, exactly as Nora had predicted she would. Pamela's county complaint changed the tempo of everything. Up until that point, this had been a private property dispute. Uncomfortable, but contained. The moment she filed with the county, it became a matter of public record. And public records cut both ways. Nora called me the morning after the complaint was filed. She had already pulled a copy. She read me the key language. Pamela had described Old Reeves Track as a historically utilized community access corridor. She had claimed the road had been in continuous community use for over a decade. She had claimed my gate closure was causing economic harm to local tourism operations. Every single one of those claims was either false or misleading. The road had not been in community use for a decade. It had been used without authorization for 3 summers. There was no community access designation on record, and the economic harm to tourism was a direct result of Pamela's own misrepresentation to the tour company, not my gate closure. Nora said this was actually good news. She said the more specific Pamela's false claims became, the easier they were to disprove. Vague complaints are harder to fight than specific ones. Specific false claims leave a paper trail. We started building that trail immediately. I contacted the county clerk's office and requested a full title search going back to original patent. I wanted every recorded document touching my parcel in the last 70 years. Deeds, surveys, easements, liens, mineral rights filings, everything. The clerk told me it would take about a week to compile. I paid the research fee and put in the request. While that was processing, I went back through my own records. I pulled every property tax statement going back 15 years. Each one listed Old Reeves Track as a private access road under sole ownership. The county itself had been taxing me on that road as private property for over a decade, while simultaneously now entertaining a complaint that it was a community corridor. I flagged that discrepancy for Nora. She said it was significant. The county could not have it both ways. They could not classify the road as private property for tax purposes and simultaneously recognize it as a public access corridor for complaint purposes. That contradiction would matter later. I also pulled my property insurance records. My policy explicitly covered Old Reeves Track as a private access road. It listed liability coverage for authorized vehicles only. If a charter bus had been involved in any incident on that road during those 3 seasons, a passenger injury, a mechanical failure, anything, the liability exposure would have been enormous, and it would have landed on me, without my knowledge, without my consent. I documented that too. Bud Wexler came by that week. He sat at my kitchen table and wrote out a hand-signed statement. He documented everything he had personally observed over the past 3 summers. The buses, the frequency, the HOA community meeting where Pamela had claimed landowner cooperation. He signed it and dated it. I had it notarized the following day. The folder was getting thick. The full title search came back 8 days later. I drove to the clerk's office and picked it up in person. It was a thick stack of documents, 73 years of recorded history on my parcel. I sat in my truck in the parking lot and went through every page. What I found confirmed everything I already knew, and then added something I had not expected. The deed chain was clean and unbroken going back to original patent. No gaps, no disputed transfers, no recorded easements of any kind on Old Reeves Track. Not a single document in 73 years suggested any third party had any legal right to use that road. But buried near the bottom of the stack was something else entirely. A commercial transport license. My grandfather had filed it in 1954. It was a county-issued license authorizing the use of Old Reeves Track for commercial rock and aggregate transport. The license had been issued in conjunction with a small quarrying operation my grandfather had run on the upper portion of the acreage in the 1950s and early 1960s. The quarry operation had wound down by 1967, but the transport license had never been formally revoked. It had simply gone dormant. I read that document 3 times. Under the original filing, the license authorized heavy commercial vehicle access on Old Reeves Track for aggregate hauling purposes. It specified load limits, operating hours, and route parameters. It was a legitimate county-issued commercial transport authorization. Still on record, never canceled. I called Nora that afternoon. She was quiet for a long moment after I told her about it. Then she asked me to bring it in immediately. I drove to her office the next morning. She examined the document carefully. She cross-referenced it against current county transport ordinances. She made several phone calls while I sat in her waiting room. When she finally called me back into her office, she had a legal pad covered in notes. She told me the license was old, but potentially still valid. She said commercial transport licenses in this county did not carry automatic expiration dates under the original filing framework. She said a dormant license was not the same as a revoked one. She said with the right filing it could potentially be reactivated. I asked her what reactivating it would mean practically. She said it would mean Old Reeves Track could be legally reopened as a licensed commercial transport route for aggregate hauling, heavy vehicles, regular commercial traffic, all of it fully authorized under a legitimate county instrument that predated the HOA subdivision by over 30 years. I let that sit for a moment. Pamela had filed a county complaint claiming my road was a community access corridor. She had done it to pressure me into opening my gate. She had assumed I would back down under official scrutiny. She had not counted on the scrutiny going both directions. I told Nora to start the reactivation process. She smiled for the first time since I had walked into her office 2 weeks earlier. While Nora worked on the reactivation filing, I kept documenting. I was not done building the record. The transport license was a powerful card, but I had learned enough by now to know that one card is never enough. You need layers. You need a case so thoroughly documented that the other side has nowhere to move. I submitted a public records request to the county for all communications related to Pamela's complaint filing. Emails, internal memos, any correspondence between the HOA and county offices regarding Old Reeves Track. The request was within my rights under state open records law. I filed it formally and waited. While that was processing, I turned my attention to Hill Country Scenic Tours. I looked them up. They had a business registration on file with the state. They had a website listing their seasonal routes. I searched their route descriptions carefully. Sure enough, the Hardin Hill Scenic Loop was listed as a featured Saturday route. The description mentioned a private hill road with panoramic views. It listed the route as part of a premium package, a paid premium package, on my private road. I took screenshots of everything, time-stamped. I saved the full web page as a PDF. I noted the pricing. The premium package was listed at $68 per person. The buses held approximately 40 passengers. That was potentially over $2,000 per run. Multiple runs per season across 3 summers. Someone had been profiting from my road for 3 years, and I had seen none of it. I forwarded everything to Nora. She added it to the file and said it strengthened the potential claim for unjust enrichment. That is a legal concept, meaning someone has profited from your property without authorization and without compensation. It is separate from trespass. It carries its own damages calculation. I also reached out to Derek from Hill Country Scenic Tours again. I sent him a formal written inquiry asking for copies of any route authorization documents he had received from the HOA. I sent it certified mail to the company's registered business address. 2 weeks later, I received a response. Not from Derek, from the company's legal representative. The letter stated that Hill Country Scenic Tours had received a written route authorization document from Hardin Hill Estates, HOA. It stated the document had represented Old Reeves Track as a designated community scenic corridor available for commercial tour access. The letter confirmed the company had paid a seasonal route licensing fee to the HOA. A licensing fee. Pamela had been collecting money from a commercial tour company for access rights to my private road, without my knowledge, without my consent, without any legal authority to do so. I read that letter 4 times. Each time it meant the same thing. What had started as an unauthorized trespass had crossed into something significantly more serious. Pamela Sturch had not just used my road, she had monetized it. She had sold access to my private property and kept the proceeds. I called Nora immediately. She told me to come in first thing Monday morning. Monday morning came with low clouds and cold air. I drove to Nora's office with the full folder, everything in order. Deed records, survey documents, certified easement search, Bud's notarized statement, the HOA letter, my certified responses, the trespass notice, the title search, the 1954 transport license, the Hill Country Scenic Tours webpage screenshots, the tour company's legal letter confirming the licensing fee payments to the HOA. Nora had her own stack of documents waiting on her desk. She had spent the weekend researching. She had pulled the HOA's recorded governing documents, their CC and Rs, their bylaws, their board meeting minutes going back 5 years, all public record. She had gone through every page. What she found was damaging. The HOA's own governing documents contained a clear and explicit provision. Board members were prohibited from entering into commercial agreements on behalf of the association without a full board vote and written member notification. Any commercial contract required a minimum 2/3 board approval and documented disclosure to all homeowners. There had been no board vote on the scenic route agreement. There had been no member notification. There had been no disclosed commercial contract. Pamela had acted entirely alone. She had signed a commercial authorization document, collected licensing fees from a tour company, and done all of it without following a single procedural requirement her own HOA rules demanded. She had not just trespassed on my property, she had also violated her fiduciary duty to her own HOA members. Nora said we now had 2 separate legal tracks. The first was my property rights claim against the HOA: trespass, unauthorized commercial use, and unjust enrichment. The second was a potential derivative action by HOA members against Pamela personally for breaching her fiduciary duty as board president. I told Nora I was only interested in the first track: my property, my road, my damages. She nodded and said that was the cleaner path anyway. We spent the rest of that morning drafting a formal legal demand letter. It was addressed to Hardin Hill Estates HOA and to Pamela Sturch individually. It outlined every documented violation. It demanded immediate cessation of all claims regarding Old Reeves Track. It demanded a formal written retraction of the county complaint. It demanded an accounting of all licensing fees collected from Hill Country Scenic Tours. And it demanded compensation for 3 seasons of unauthorized commercial use of my private property. Nora put a 14-day response deadline on it. We sent it certified mail to the HOA's registered address and to Pamela's home address simultaneously. Then we waited. On day 11, I got a call from a county roads administrator named Commissioner Theo Langford. He said he had received our legal correspondence and wanted to schedule a meeting. His tone was careful, measured. He said the county needed to review the status of the original complaint in light of the new documentation. I told him I would be available whenever he needed. He scheduled a meeting for the following Thursday. He said he would need Nora present. He said the HOA had also been notified and would likely send representation. The authority clash was no longer just between me and Pamela. It had moved into official county territory. Thursday arrived gray and still. I put on a clean shirt and drove to the county administrative building with Nora. We arrived 10 minutes early. Commissioner Langford's office was on the 2nd floor. Plain furniture, a large window overlooking the courthouse parking lot, a round table with 4 chairs. Pamela was already there when we walked in. She had brought a man I did not recognize. Nora told me quietly he was a local attorney named Briggs, who handled HOA matters in the area. Pamela was dressed formally. Her expression was composed. She gave me a brief nod when I entered. I nodded back and sat down. Commissioner Langford opened the meeting without ceremony. He said the county had received 2 conflicting filings regarding Old Reeves Track: a trespass notice from me and a community access complaint from the HOA. He said it was the county's position that both filings could not be simultaneously valid. He said the county needed to establish the legal status of the road before proceeding further with either filing. He turned to Pamela's attorney first. Briggs presented the HOA's position. He argued that Old Reeves Track had been in continuous community use for an extended period. He used the phrase prescriptive easement. That is, a legal concept where long-term open and continuous use of someone else's property can sometimes create a legal right of access even without a recorded agreement. I watched Nora write 2 words on her legal pad. She underlined them both: continuous use. Briggs argued that 3 seasons of regular tour bus access constituted a pattern of use sufficient to support a prescriptive easement claim. He said the HOA would be prepared to file formally if necessary. Nora waited until he finished. Then she laid our documents on the table one at a time. She started with the deed. Clean chain of title going back to original patent. She placed the certified easement search beside it. 0 recorded access rights. She placed the title search results. 73 years of unbroken private ownership. She placed the property tax statements showing the county's own classification of Old Reeves Track as private property. Then she addressed the prescriptive easement argument directly. She said prescriptive easement requires open, continuous, hostile, and uninterrupted use for a statutory period. She said the use in question had been 3 seasons. She said 3 seasons did not meet the statutory threshold in this state. She said furthermore the use had not been hostile in the legal sense, it had been covert. Pamela had represented the road to the tour company as an authorized community corridor. That misrepresentation undermined any claim of open and hostile use. Then Nora placed the tour company's legal letter on the table. She slid it directly in front of Commissioner Langford. She said this letter confirmed that the HOA had collected commercial licensing fees for access to private property without the owner's knowledge or consent. She said that was not a prescriptive easement case. That was an unauthorized commercial exploitation case. The room was very quiet. Commissioner Langford read the letter twice. Then he set it down and looked at Pamela. Her composure had not broken, but something behind her eyes had shifted. Commissioner Langford set the tour company letter down carefully. He asked Pamela's attorney directly whether the HOA disputed the authenticity of that document. Briggs conferred quietly with Pamela for a moment. Then he said they were not in a position to dispute it at this time. He said the HOA would need to conduct an internal review before making any further representations. That was a retreat, a careful, lawyerly retreat, but a retreat nonetheless. Commissioner Langford turned to his own notes. He said the county had reviewed the original complaint filing and the documentation submitted by my attorney. He said based on that review, the county was not prepared to recognize Old Reeves Track as a community access corridor. He said the road's classification as private property was supported by the recorded deed, the tax records, and the absence of any recorded easement. He said the HOA's complaint was being administratively closed, pending any formal legal action they chose to pursue through the courts. Briggs started to speak. Langford raised one hand slightly. He was not finished. He said there was a second matter he needed to address. He said his office had received a copy of the 1954 commercial transport license during their review of the title documents. He said his office had consulted with the County Transport Authority regarding its current status. I kept my expression neutral. Nora had coached me on this. Whatever happened in this room, I was to remain calm and say nothing unless she indicated otherwise. Langford said the transport license had been reviewed by the County Transport Authority. He said under the original filing framework applicable at the time of issuance, the license did not carry an automatic expiration provision. He said the County Transport Authority's position was that the license remained a valid, dormant instrument on record. He looked at me directly when he said the next part. He said if I chose to reactivate commercial transport operations on Old Reeves Track, I would need to submit a current vehicle and load compliance filing with his office. Standard procedure for any dormant commercial route being brought back into active use. He said assuming the compliance filing met current road safety standards, the county would have no grounds to deny the reactivation. Pamela's attorney had gone very still. Pamela herself had not moved. But the practiced composure she had walked into that room with was gone now, replaced by something harder and more brittle. Langford closed his folder and stood up. He thanked everyone for their time. He said his office would send formal written confirmation of the complaint closure within 5 business days. He shook hands with Nora and with me. He gave a brief professional nod to Briggs and Pamela. Then he left the room. Briggs gathered his papers quickly. He told Pamela they needed to talk privately. She stood up without looking at me. She picked up her bag. She walked toward the door. At the doorway, she stopped. She turned and looked at me for a long moment. No pleasantness now. No practiced warmth. Just a flat, hard look. Then she walked out. Nora waited until the footsteps faded down the hallway. Then she turned to me and said 3 words quietly. File the compliance. I filed the vehicle and load compliance paperwork the following Monday. Nora helped me prepare it. We documented the road dimensions, the gravel surface specifications, the gradient of the slope, and the existing drainage infrastructure. We specified the vehicle classes, heavy aggregate haulers, standard commercial trucks, and the proposed operating schedule. 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday. First load out at 7 in the morning. The compliance officer reviewed the filing within 3 days. He came out to inspect the road in person. He walked the full 1.5 miles with a clipboard and a measuring wheel. He checked the surface condition. He checked the culverts. He checked the turning radius at 3 points along the route. He told me the road was in better condition than most active commercial routes he inspected. He said the original construction had been solid. My grandfather had built it to last. The compliance approval came back in writing 8 days after filing. Old Reeves Track was now an approved active commercial transport route. I called 2 aggregate hauling contractors I had worked with over the years. Both were interested. One operated a fleet of standard tandem axle trucks. The other ran larger combination vehicles for bulk material transport. I explained the route, the schedule, and the nature of the operation. Both signed short-term hauling agreements within the week. The first truck came up my road on a Monday morning at 7:03. It was a fully loaded tandem axle hauler, 18 tons of crushed limestone. The engine was loud on the grade. The tires bit into the gravel cleanly. It made the run up and back in under 40 minutes. I stood at my porch and watched it go. Then I went inside and poured a second cup of coffee. By Wednesday of that first week, 3 trucks were running daily rotations. The operation was modest but legitimate, fully licensed, fully documented, fully within the parameters of the approved compliance filing. The noise was noticeable from the HOA subdivision. I know this because Bud Wexler told me. He said several HOA residents had been out on their back decks watching the trucks go past, with expressions he described as somewhere between confused and deeply unhappy. He said he had seen Pamela standing at her rear fence line on Tuesday afternoon, just watching. Not doing anything, just watching. I had not done any of this to punish anyone. I want to be clear about that. The commercial transport operation was legitimate business. It generated real revenue. It utilized a legally licensed route. Every aspect of it was above board. But I also understood the reality of what was happening. Pamela had spent 3 summers running tour buses up my road without permission. She had collected licensing fees from a commercial company for access to my private property. She had filed a county complaint trying to pressure me when I closed my gate. She had sat across a table from me and a county commissioner and tried to argue prescriptive easement on a road she had been exploiting covertly. And now she was standing at her fence line watching 18-ton trucks roll past her scenic hill view 6 days a week. The road was always mine. It had just changed its purpose. The trucks had been running for 11 days when the second HOA letter arrived. This one was different in tone from the first. The practiced authority was gone. In its place was something that read closer to desperation, dressed up in formal language. It stated that the commercial hauling operation was creating unreasonable noise and dust impact on the Hardin Hill Estates community. It cited quality of life concerns. It cited property value implications. It requested an immediate voluntary suspension of operations pending a community impact review. I read it once. Then I placed it in the folder. I did not respond. 4 days later, a second letter arrived. This one was from Briggs, Pamela's attorney. It was more formal in structure but carried the same underlying urgency. It claimed the hauling operation constituted a nuisance under state property law. It threatened injunctive relief if operations did not cease. It requested a meeting to discuss a negotiated resolution. I forwarded both letters to Nora. She called me that evening. She said the nuisance claim had no merit. A licensed commercial operation on a privately owned, county-approved transport route was not a legal nuisance simply because neighboring residents found it inconvenient. She said the noise and dust levels would need to significantly exceed measurable legal thresholds to support any injunction. They did not. She said the request for a negotiated resolution was the more interesting development. I asked her what she meant. She said when the other side starts asking for a meeting to discuss resolution, it usually means they have done their own legal assessment and do not like what they found. She said Briggs was a competent attorney. He would have reviewed the trespass exposure, the unjust enrichment claim, and the fiduciary breach issue by now. He would have advised Pamela on what those claims were likely worth in front of a judge. She said she recommended we agree to the meeting, but on our terms, with our demand letter on the table from the start. I told her to set it up. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon 2 weeks out. In the interim, the trucks kept running. Monday through Saturday, 7 in the morning, regular as the weather. During that period, something else happened that I had not anticipated. 3 HOA homeowners contacted me directly, not Pamela, not through any official HOA channel, individually. 2 by phone, and 1 who drove up my road in a pickup truck and knocked on my door. All three said essentially the same thing. They had not known about the tour bus arrangement. They had not known licensing fees had been collected. They had not been notified or consulted. They were angry. Not at me, at Pamela. The homeowner who came to my door was a retired contractor named Aldous Crane. He was direct and unhurried. He sat on my porch for 20 minutes. He said he had requested a full accounting of HOA finances from Pamela twice in the past month and been denied both times. He said 4 other homeowners had made the same request. He said they were considering a formal petition to call a special board meeting. I listened carefully. I did not encourage or discourage anything, but I took notes after he left. The trap had not been set deliberately. It had assembled itself from Pamela's own decisions, and it was closing from every direction simultaneously. The negotiation meeting happened on a Thursday afternoon in Nora's conference room. Briggs came alone. Pamela was not present. I took that as a signal. When a principal stops showing up to their own negotiations, it usually means the attorney has taken full control of damage limitation. Pamela was no longer driving this. She was being managed. Briggs opened by acknowledging that the HOA's county complaint had been administratively closed. He said the HOA was not pursuing the prescriptive easement claim at this time. He said his client was prepared to formally withdraw all access assertions regarding Old Reeves Track in exchange for a mutual release of claims. A mutual release of claims. That phrase meant Pamela wanted me to give up my trespass claim, my unjust enrichment claim, and anything else I had against her, in exchange for her dropping a complaint that had already been closed and a legal argument she had already abandoned. Nora let him finish. Then she opened her folder. She placed our original demand letter on the table. She said the mutual release proposal was not acceptable. She said my claims were documented, substantiated, and had strong merit. She said we were prepared to proceed to formal litigation if necessary. She outlined the 3 primary claims: trespass covering 3 seasons of unauthorized commercial access, unjust enrichment covering the licensing fees collected from Hill Country Scenic Tours, and a third claim she introduced for the first time in that meeting: fraudulent misrepresentation. Pamela had provided a false authorization document to a commercial company misrepresenting the ownership and access status of my private road. Briggs was quiet for a moment. Then he asked what resolution would look like from our side. Nora said 3 things. First, a full written accounting of all licensing fees collected from Hill Country Scenic Tours across all 3 seasons. Second, full restitution of those fees to me. Third, a formal recorded document permanently acknowledging my sole ownership of Old Reeves Track and releasing all HOA access claims in perpetuity. Briggs said the accounting and restitution figure would need to be verified. Nora said we had our own calculation ready and placed a single page on the table. It documented estimated seasonal runs, passenger capacity, premium package pricing, and a conservative licensing fee estimate based on industry-standard tour route agreements. The total was not a small number. Briggs looked at the page for a long time. He said he would need to consult with his client. Nora said he had 7 days. The meeting lasted 40 minutes total. When Briggs left, Nora and I sat in the conference room for a few minutes without speaking. Then she told me the fraudulent misrepresentation claim was the one Pamela feared most. Trespass and unjust enrichment were civil matters with financial remedies. Fraudulent misrepresentation carried the possibility of punitive damages. It also carried reputational weight that no amount of careful HOA positioning could neutralize. Pamela had not just overstepped. She had deceived a commercial company and exposed herself to personal liability that her HOA board title could not shield her from. The public exposure had not happened yet, but it was 1 week away. Briggs did not respond within 7 days. He responded on day 6. Late afternoon, a phone call to Nora. He said his client was not prepared to meet the restitution figure we had presented. He said the HOA disputed the methodology of our licensing fee calculation. He said Pamela was prepared to offer a significantly lower settlement number and a formal access release document. Nora told him we would not negotiate the restitution figure downward without a full financial accounting first. She said if his client was unwilling to provide that accounting, we would proceed to formal litigation and obtain it through discovery. Briggs said he would relay that position. He called back the following morning. He said his client would not produce a voluntary accounting. He said they were prepared to proceed to litigation if necessary. Nora hung up and called me immediately. She said we were filing. I told her to proceed. The lawsuit was filed the following Tuesday. It named Hardin Hill Estates HOA and Pamela Sturch individually as defendants. 3 counts: trespass, unjust enrichment, fraudulent misrepresentation. We attached every document in the folder as exhibits: the deed, the survey, the easement search, the title search, the transport license, Bud's notarized statement, the tour company's legal letter, the HOA's own governing documents showing Pamela had violated her own board protocols, the demand letter, the correspondence record, everything. Court filings are public record. Within 48 hours of the filing, Aldous Crane called me. He had pulled the lawsuit documents from the county court's public portal. He had shared them with the group of homeowners who had been requesting the financial accounting from Pamela. He said the reaction inside the HOA community had been significant. I asked him to describe significant. He said Pamela had called an emergency HOA meeting for the following Sunday. He said attendance was expected to be the highest in the association's history. He said several homeowners were arriving with printed copies of the court filing. I did not attend that meeting. It was not my meeting to attend. But Bud Wexler lived close enough to the HOA clubhouse to hear the raised voices through his kitchen window that Sunday evening. He called me afterward. He said it had gone on for nearly 3 hours. He said Pamela had tried to characterize the lawsuit as an aggressive action by a hostile neighbor. He said the homeowners who had seen the filing documents had not accepted that characterization. He said by the end of the meeting a formal petition had been submitted calling for a special election to remove Pamela from the board presidency. The petition had been signed by 26 of the 41 HOA homeowners. The public exposure Pamela had spent months carefully avoiding had arrived anyway. Not through a press release, not through any dramatic confrontation. It had arrived through court documents on a public portal and a group of homeowners who had simply read them. She had built her entire operation on the assumption that nobody would look closely enough, that I would back down, that the tour buses would keep running, that the licensing fees would keep coming, that the road would stay open because she had decided it should. Every one of those assumptions had been wrong. The case was assigned to a civil court judge named Harwell. Pretrial proceedings moved at the steady, unhurried pace that civil litigation always moves. Document exchanges, interrogatories, depositions. Neither side was in a rush. Nora had told me early on that civil property cases rarely moved fast. She said patience was not optional in a courtroom. It was a requirement. I had already spent 3 years being patient. A few more months was not going to break me. Briggs filed a motion to dismiss on the fraudulent misrepresentation count within the first 30 days of the filing. His argument was that Pamela had acted in good faith based on a reasonable belief about the road's community status. Judge Harwell denied the motion without extended commentary. That denial was significant. It meant the court found sufficient basis in our pleadings to let all 3 counts proceed to trial. Trespass, unjust enrichment, fraudulent misrepresentation. All 3 moving forward. Nora told me the denial was the first real signal of how the judge was reading the case. She said judges who intend to dismiss at trial rarely let all counts survive a motion to dismiss. She said we were in a strong position. Discovery was where the case broke open completely. Through the formal discovery process, Nora obtained what Pamela had refused to produce voluntarily: the full financial records of the HOA for the 3 seasons in question, bank statements, the actual signed route authorization agreement between Pamela and Hill Country Scenic Tours, invoices, payment confirmation records, internal HOA correspondence. The numbers were worse than our conservative estimate. Pamela had collected $12,400 in seasonal route licensing fees across 3 summers. The money had been deposited into an HOA operating account. It had not been disclosed in any HOA financial statement distributed to homeowners. It had not been voted on. It had not been documented in any board meeting minutes. It had not been reported at any community meeting. It had simply appeared in the account and been quietly absorbed into general operating expenses over time. $12,400 from my road over 3 years, without my knowledge, without my consent, without a single homeowner in her own association being told. The internal HOA correspondence was equally damaging. There were emails between Pamela and Greg discussing the tour arrangement. In one exchange, Greg had asked her whether she had confirmed the road's ownership status before signing the agreement. Her response was 3 words: "It will be fine." Nora flagged that email immediately. She said it undermined any good faith defense Pamela might have attempted at trial. You cannot claim good faith belief when your own private correspondence shows you were warned to verify and chose not to. Nora took Pamela's deposition on a Tuesday morning in early spring. I was not present for the deposition. Nora briefed me afterward in detail. She was thorough and precise in her account. She said Pamela had arrived composed and well prepared, dressed carefully, posture straight, answers rehearsed. The composure had held through the early biographical questions and the procedural background questions. It had begun to fracture when Nora placed the signed route authorization document in front of her and asked her to confirm her signature. She confirmed it. Nora asked her when she had first visited Old Reeves Track to assess its suitability as a tour route. Pamela said she had driven it several times before approaching the tour company. Nora asked whether she had contacted the property owner before or after those visits. Pamela said she had believed the road was a community access corridor at that time. Nora asked her to identify the recorded document that supported that belief. There was a long pause. Briggs objected on form. Nora rephrased. Pamela said it had been her understanding based on long-standing community custom. Nora asked her to identify a single written communication, email, letter, text message, anything, in which she had attempted to verify the road's ownership status before signing the route authorization agreement. Another long pause. Pamela could not identify one. Because there was not one. She had never checked. She had driven my road, decided it was available, approached a commercial tour company, signed a route authorization document, and collected money. All without making a single attempt to verify who owned the road she was selling access to. Nora moved methodically through the financial records next. She walked Pamela through every deposit, every invoice, every line item where the licensing fee revenue appeared in the HOA accounts. She asked Pamela to identify the board meeting minutes where these deposits had been disclosed to homeowners. There were none. She asked Pamela to identify the member notification where homeowners had been informed of the commercial arrangement. There was none. She asked Pamela to identify the board vote authorizing her to enter into a commercial licensing agreement on behalf of the association. There was none. Each answer landed in the deposition record with the quiet finality of a door being closed. By the time Nora finished the financial portion of the deposition, the room had the particular stillness that settles over a proceeding when everyone present understands exactly what the outcome is going to be. Briggs had objected periodically throughout. Form objections mostly. Procedural cushions that preserved his record without changing the substance of a single answer. He was a competent attorney doing his job. But there was nothing in his toolkit that could change what the document said or what his client had just confirmed under oath. At the conclusion of the deposition, Briggs requested a brief recess. When they reconvened, he asked Nora quietly whether her client would consider a pretrial settlement discussion. Nora said she would relay the question. She called me that evening. She said the deposition had gone as well as she had hoped. She said Briggs was now fully aware of what a trial would look like. She said the email between Pamela and Greg, the "it will be fine" email, was the kind of exhibit that juries remember. It was short, it was clear, it showed knowing disregard. She said if Briggs was a good attorney, and he would be advising Pamela strongly to settle before that email was read aloud in open court. I asked Nora what she recommended. She said settle if the terms were right. She said trials are unpredictable regardless of how strong your position is. She said a documented settlement with a recorded easement release was worth more to me long-term than a jury verdict that could be appealed. I told her I trusted her judgment. She said she would make our position clear in the settlement discussions. Full restitution, recorded easement release, formal retraction of the county complaint, nothing less. I told her those terms were not negotiable. She said she knew. We scheduled the first settlement session for the following week. I drove to Nora's office that morning feeling neither anxious nor triumphant, just steady, the same way I had felt at every stage of this process. The documents were in order, the facts were documented, the law was clear. Whatever happened next would happen on solid ground. That was all I had ever needed it to be. We settled 3 weeks before the trial date. The terms were negotiated over 4 sessions. Nora handled every one of them. I attended the final session only to review and sign the agreement. I did not speak directly to Pamela during that meeting. Briggs handled everything on her side. She sat at the far end of the table with her hands folded and her eyes mostly down. The practiced composure she had carried through every earlier meeting was gone. What remained was something quieter and harder to read. Not remorse exactly, more like exhaustion. There was nothing left to say between us, so I said nothing. The settlement terms were as follows. Full restitution of all licensing fees collected. $12,400 paid directly to me within 30 days. A formal recorded easement release document permanently acknowledging my sole and unencumbered ownership of Old Reeves Track. The document was drafted by Nora, reviewed by Briggs, and recorded with the county clerk within 2 weeks of signing. It became part of the permanent property record, attached to my deed, searchable, irremovable. A confidentiality provision covered the specific settlement figures, though not the underlying facts of the case, which remained part of the public court record and always would. There was also a written retraction of the original county complaint, filed formally with Commissioner Langford's office. His office acknowledged receipt and updated the administrative record accordingly. The complaint that had started all of this, the one Pamela had filed to pressure me into opening my gate, was now officially withdrawn and documented as unfounded. Pamela resigned from the HOA board presidency the same week the settlement was signed. Aldous Crane called to tell me. He said the special election had proceeded regardless of her resignation. The homeowners had voted in a new 3-person board with a clear mandate for financial transparency. New oversight protocols had been established requiring dual signatures on all expenditures above a certain threshold. A full independent audit of HOA finances for the prior 4 years had been commissioned and was already underway. I do not know what that audit found. It was not my concern, and I did not ask. The commercial hauling operation continued for another 2 months after the settlement. I had active contracts to honor, and I honored them. The trucks ran their schedule, Monday through Saturday, 7 in the morning. The last run came down the hill on a Friday afternoon in late autumn. I watched it from the porch. The driver gave a short horn tap as he passed the lower gate. I raised a hand. Then the road went quiet, back to what it had always been. A private gravel track cutting through scrub oak and limestone on the eastern slope of Hardin Hill. No tour buses, no charter schedules, no licensing arrangements, no county complaints. Just my road. Documented, undisputed, exactly as my grandfather had left it. I had Bud Wexler over for coffee the week after everything concluded. We sat on my back porch and watched the hill go gold in the late afternoon light. He asked me if I felt satisfied with how it had ended. I thought about that for a moment. I told him I felt settled. Not satisfied exactly. Satisfied implies something enjoyable happened. None of this had been enjoyable. It had cost me time, attorney fees, and a significant portion of 2 years I would have preferred to spend running my business and failing at growing tomatoes. But it had ended correctly. The property record was clean. The road was documented. The money had been returned. The false claims had been formally retracted. That was not satisfaction. That was restoration. Bud nodded slowly. He refilled both cups without being asked. We sat there until the light faded completely and the hill went dark and still around us. People sometimes ask me what I would have done differently. The honest answer is very little. Not because I handled everything perfectly, but because the situation did not require cleverness. It required patience. It required documentation. It required a willingness to let the process work at its own pace without forcing it or abandoning it when it got uncomfortable. Pamela Sturch was not an unusual type of person. I have met versions of her before. People who confuse confidence with authority. People who mistake the absence of immediate resistance for permanent permission. She looked at my road and saw an opportunity. She looked at me and saw someone who would not notice or would not act. She built an entire operation on that assumption. The assumption was wrong. That is all. There is a lesson in the documentation. Every letter sent certified. Every phone call noted with date and time. Every photograph time-stamped. Every county record pulled and copied. None of it felt significant in the moment. It felt like paperwork. It felt like caution bordering on obsession. But when the time came to sit across a table from an attorney and a county commissioner, every single piece of that paperwork pulled its weight. There is also a lesson in the transport license. My grandfather filed that document in 1954 and likely never thought about it again. It sat in a county archive for 70 years. It had no practical relevance to anything for decades, until the day it had complete and total relevance to everything. You do not always know which documents matter until the moment you need them. That is why you keep them. That is why you never throw anything away. A deed, a survey, a license, a receipt. Any one of them could be the document that decides everything. There is a lesson in restraint as well. I never raised my voice through any of this. Not on the phone with Pamela, not in Commissioner Langford's office, not during the settlement sessions. Anger would have felt justified at many points along the way. 3 summers of unauthorized use, $12,000 collected from my property without my knowledge, a county complaint filed against me for closing my own gate. The anger would have been understandable. But anger does not win property disputes. Documents win property disputes. Calm wins property disputes. Showing up prepared and letting the facts speak without embellishment or emotion, that is what wins. There is a final lesson that I think about more than the others. Pamela escalated this at every stage. She had opportunities to step back. When I called her the first time, she could have apologized and ended the arrangement immediately. When I sent the certified letter, she could have responded honestly. When Nora's demand letter arrived, she could have settled quietly with minimal exposure. She chose escalation every single time. Not because escalation was strategically sound, but because she had never encountered meaningful resistance before and did not know how to recalibrate when she finally did. Arrogance is not a strategy. It feels like one when it is working. It falls apart completely the moment someone decides to document everything and wait. My road is quiet now. The gate is locked. The deed is clean. The property record says what it has always said. Old Reeves track, private, sole ownership, Colt Reeves. That is how it was always going to end. It just took 3 years and a 70-year-old piece of paper to get there.